Hello, everyone. I think we can start our webinar today, Deep Dive European EPR, with special focus on United Kingdom. I hope you can all hear me. You can confirm in chat box. I will first give some short introduction about extended producer responsibility as a policy instrument shaping circular economy. And then we will welcome our keynote speaker, Esther Carter from PackUK. I could see some hands up and thumbs up for the fact that you can hear me. So I will start my presentation now. For those who do not know Reloop platform, we are a global organization working with circular economy, and we focus on 5 programs: meaningful measurement, reuse revolution, money back, collect more, sort more, and closing the loop. Within these programs, we do work with extended producer responsibility. We cooperate with the whole value chain of the market actors with the objective to implement circular economy. And since 2022, Reloop platform has been accredited via United Nations Environment Program. Today, I will give a little bit context before we jump into the topic of reform, comprehensive reform of packaging, extended producer responsibility in UK. And to give you a bit of the context and the definition, what extended producer responsibility is, it is a strategy to protect the environment, to decrease total environmental impact of the product or packaging, and not only packaging can be covered by the EPR. And how is it done? It is through making producers, fillers, importers responsible for the entire life cycle of the product or packaging life cycle, especially for taking back, for recycling, and final disposal. And what's the background of extended producer responsibility? Well, it started with economic development, which is obviously positive, but unfortunately, the economic development in Western countries resulted with lots of waste as a result of accelerating consumption. And extended producer responsibility as the strategy, environmental strategy, was coined as a term in Sweden as an answer to the pressure that this waste had given on the environment, and also municipalities. Municipalities had to collect more and more waste, and of course everything was connected to financing. So inspired by Swedish deposit system established in 1984 for single-use containers, Professor Lindqvist, who is by the way the member of the board at Reloop platform, came up with the way to tackle this challenge of lack of financing in municipalities by presenting extended producer responsibility as the environmental strategy. And the definition was subsequently presented at the United Nations Environment Program workshop, which was dedicated to cleaner production program. I would like to say now, in the context of the discussions of plastic treaty and also circular economy, that extended producer responsibility is continuous, sustainable, and balanced policy instrument and the source of financing. It is continuous because it finances not just a project that has start and an end. It finances the continuous operations related to the placing on market and collecting the packaging waste. It is also sustainable because once enforced, extended producer responsibility represents the stable and permanent source of financing, and it is balanced. Why? Because it emphasizes the cost coverage per each item that is placed on market and that may represent challenge to environment. And as you can later see in our policy recommendations, Reloop stands for net cost coverage, as well as the fact that all packaging materials pay for themselves. Extended producer responsibility is a very important policy instrument as the mandatory EPR shaping circular economy, but it also coexists with other policy instruments such as minimum collection targets, green procurement, eco-design, obviously. Also, mixed waste sorting. We need to look into what's in the black bin and recover the recyclables from the black bin as well as the recycled content. We need to create the demand for post-consumer waste. But extended responsibility is also very unique and special policy instrument because EPR has created several tools. One of the tools that is extremely important is a packaging recovery organization or entities like PackUK, the role of which will be very much related to the implementation of other policy instruments shaping a circular economy. And we can now discuss the example of reuse. As we know, in France, CITEO, PRO is very important entity implementing planning for the reuse policy, implementing pilot projects and preparing for the big scale project of the reuse in the French Republic. We can also talk about eco-design, another policy instrument, extremely important for circular economy. We need recyclable packaging, and with the objective to have recyclable packaging, we need organizations, we need networks like PROs to work with producers and implement research and development, as well as apply eco-modulation. Last but not least, PROs are also extremely important for implementation of recycled content. So to uptake the post-consumer waste, post-consumer recyclates, and utilize them in the production of new packaging. With this introduction, I will now stop sharing my screen, and I would like to welcome Esther Carter from PackUK. Esther is Chief Strategy Officer at the newly established entity. Esther, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. I hope you can all hear me okay. And I will share my screen as well. Good to see a few names that I recognise in the chat. For those I haven't met, as mentioned, I'm Esther and I am Chief Strategy Officer at PackUK, and that means I oversee all of our work related to fees, fee modulation, modelling, our work with local authorities to drive efficiency and effectiveness, our work across the 4 nations, and I'll touch on that in a moment in terms of the UK setup, as well as all of our communications and engagement work. Been working in the space of consumer goods, packaging and recycling for the last 15 years, particularly in the global south, where I was setting up waste management systems in places like Indonesia, Argentina, Brazil, and a few others that sound a lot more glamorous than they are in practice when you spend most of your time on informal dump sites. So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit just to give you an overview of the UK system on the basis that many of you will be familiar with the concept of EPR as shared by Anna, but the UK system is a little bit different compared to a lot of wider Europe, and I'll draw out some of those comparison points as well as we go through. So PackUK. PackUK were founded in January of 2025. So we've just celebrated our 1-year anniversary. And we are the scheme administrator for packaging, and it is specific to packaging, extended producer responsibility on behalf of the 4 UK nations. So what that means in practice is that we're responsible for EPR across England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. We are hosted by DEFRA. DEFRA is the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and so we are a UK government body, and I'll talk a little bit more about the relationship between PackUK and the newly appointed Producer Responsibility Organisation, or PRO, in just a moment. So I think hopefully most are familiar with the overall concept, but just to give a sense as to how this works in the UK, across the value chain from the production and consumption of household packaging through to its collection and disposal by local authorities, we, as PackUK, are collecting fees from obligated producers. There are about 4,500 obligated producers in the UK. We set, and this is different to Europe, a threshold for a minimum size of producers. They have to have annual turnover of greater than £2 million and put more than 50 tonnes of packaging onto the market annually. So those are the ones that are obligated if they are producing household packaging and meet that criteria. Those payments are then collected through the scheme administrator, PackUK, and made as direct payments to local authorities to cover the efficient and effective disposal and collection of that household packaging. And of course, all of that is view and the aim of reducing waste, increasing recycling rates, and driving circularity throughout the system. So as ever, sounds quite straightforward on paper. There's a lot of complexity and nuance to that, which we'll touch on in a moment. In terms of the stakeholder landscape for packaging EPR in the UK, as I say, it's a somewhat complicated picture, and this is a highly oversimplified illustration, but just to kind of call out a few things. As the scheme administrator, we are not responsible for setting the policy. We are responsible for operationalising and delivering against the policy. So in the UK, environmental policy is a devolved competency. So what that means is each of the 4 nations are responsible for setting that policy intent. And that is then the input that drives what we are responsible for delivering in conjunction and support with local authorities, industry, whether that's producers, compliance schemes, trade associations, other waste management actors. Now, what you see in the sort of light grey box is that we work then very closely with a set of regulators. The regulators in the UK are responsible for compliance, so ensuring that we're bringing producers into compliance if they are obligated, making sure we've got accurate and reliable data on which the fees and the calculations are based. And the final piece of this puzzle, which is just in the process of completing, is the appointment of the PRO. That happened last month. The UK Packaging Pro, which is a bid supported by the Food and Drink Federation, British Retail Consortium, and a representative group of a number of different large producers, many of whom you would recognise, have recently been appointed. And over time, PackUK will delegate some of the responsibilities and functions that we do today to that PRO. What is slightly different and unique compared to other systems in Europe is that PackUK will retain responsibility for what are referred to as sovereign functions. And sovereign functions in this case is the movement of money. And that is because it has been classified in a certain way by the UK government, and that requires, therefore, a UK government body to be responsible for that administration. So that's a sort of overall landscape in which we are operating. And I've touched on very briefly there the PRO that will be taking on increasing amounts of responsibility in the coming years and is already a very close partner in the delivery of the scheme. So I touched on the fact that it's still early days in the UK. I mentioned that we officially launched as PackUK in January of 2025. It has been a very busy a few months or year, I should say. And there's a few of the kind of milestones called out here. But the particular one I wanted to focus on was the one that is highlighted in blue, which is the first notices of liability issued. That essentially means that it was October 2025 when the first bills or invoices were provided to producers, obligated producers. And of course, that's the point at which it moves from a somewhat hypothetical policy reality into an operational delivery mechanism. It was only a couple of months later then that we made our first payments to local authorities, and we have now completed an entire cycle of year one, paying out over £1.5 billion to local authorities across the 4 nations. So I've mentioned a few of these numbers here, but just to kind of give that perspective in terms of size and scale, about £1.5 billion that is funding that has been collected from packaging producers and then shared back with local authorities across a producer base of almost 4,500 obligated producers to approximately 400 or 388 local authorities. And just to give a sense of scale, PackUK is an organisation of about 65 people. A lot of that is focused, as you can imagine, on the sort of finance, operational, digital platforms, the modeling, the calculations, as well as things like fraud, risk, error, and assurance are key parts of making sure that the scheme is running effectively. So that's the overall setup. I thought I'd go into a little bit more detail as to what that all means in practice, as to how are we using EPR to drive outcomes. And it is one thing, as we know, to set up an EPR scheme and move money from left to right. But actually, what is most important in terms of the policy intent, certainly why I took the role personally, is that we are using EPR as a financial mechanism to drive improved environmental outcomes and circularity. So you'll recognize the reuse, recycle terminology from the waste hierarchy, of course, but actually it's interesting to think about what levers EPR and PackUK specifically have in each of those areas. So from a reduction perspective, this is the first time producers are being charged in the UK for the packaging they use. So there have been other systems in the past. You may be familiar with the PRN system, which is being used to charge producers for the recycling of the material. But EPR in this case is specifically focused on providing producers with a way of paying for the collection and disposal of material. And that is the first time that we've really created an incentive, a financial incentive, to improve the quality and reduce the amount of packaging that is placed on market in the first place. From a reuse perspective, producers are only charged the first time reusable packaging is placed on the market. So if that material is reused, they do not need to continue to pay that cost, unlike if they are to continue to put new material, new packaging onto the market. And then recycling, or probably the most interesting one, is this is where we have eco-modulated fees. That means that packaging compatible with local authority recycling systems is relatively cheaper. Now, in year one of the scheme, we introduced fees that were only differentiated by material groups. We have 8 different material groups. We are looking at expanding those sub-packaging categories in the future. But it is now, as we move into year 2, that we are introducing that eco-modulation to make harder to recycle material more expensive. So how does that work in the UK? And there's some similarities from what you'll recognize from Europe, although I would call out that this is different to the Design for Recycling guidelines. It is not a Design for Recycling guideline. It is essentially a mechanism through which we can charge producers, and we would call it the Recyclability Assessment Methodology, the RAM, where we use a fairly simple on surface red, amber, and green rating, where red represents packaging that is very difficult to recycle at scale. Amber is packaging that may experience some challenges during collection, sorting, or reprocessing, and green packaging is widely recyclable in the current UK infrastructure. So it isn't only about collection, and that's important because there are a number of collection reforms that are also ongoing in the UK to try and improve the variety and consistency of material that is being collected, particularly at curbside. But we are also looking at whether the material is collected, whether the material is sorted, whether the material can be recycled and is recycled in practice, and also where it ends up in terms of end market demand and kind of cases for the recycled product. Now, over time, we're looking at how we can make sure this is as data-driven as possible, that it's not only based on what is technically recyclable, but based on what is actually happening in the real world in practice. So different kinds of packaging receive different ratings according to the red, amber, and green structure. And those charges are then modulated over time to incentivize the use of more recyclable material. So as I said, that wasn't introduced in year one of the scheme, where the fees were flat across different material groups. But as we go into year two of the scheme, which is 2026, now we have modulated fees whereby there will be a 20% premium charged to material that is considered red, so fundamentally incompatible with the recycling system. The money that is raised from that 20% premium from the red is then used to reinvest and discount the green fee. Over time, that fee modulation will increase. So in 2027, we have already publicly declared that that fee modulation will be 60% higher for red fees compared to amber fees. And by 2028, it will be 100% more expensive than base fees, or amber fees, I should say, i.e. it is twice as expensive to put red material onto the market than it is to put amber fees onto the market. And obviously the exact sort of discount factor for green will be based on the proportions that we get in terms of the data submitted that allow us to then calculate that discount. What is important is that modulation is cost neutral to producers overall. So if you think about it as a pie, we're taking the total cost of the scheme, which is the net efficient and effective cost to local authorities of their disposal and collection services, and then it is divided by the number of tonnes being put onto the market and then modulated. So this doesn't increase the total cost, but it does redistribute the costs in the favour of producers that are using more recyclable material. And over time, we're looking at ways that we can modulate beyond 2030. At the moment, the modulation factors are very focused on recyclability. There, of course, are other factors that we may look to consider in the future, be that carbon intensity, biodiversity. I mean, there's a whole range of metrics that we could introduce, and we're just working through what that might look like at the moment. So in terms of the impact that that might have, and I'll talk hypothetically for a moment, but we do now, we're starting to see the data from producers that is submitted in line with the RAM. And to give you an approximate sense of scale, about 20% of the packaging data that we have received to date indicates red material. So let's call it 20% for the purposes of this illustrative example. Right now in the UK, the current packaging recycling rate across the 4 nations is 64%. That's based on the latest 2024 data, available in the link in the, on the slide. If we are able to create the financial disincentives that over time remove that material from the market, all other things being equal, so no further improvements in local authority, effectiveness and efficiency, which is obviously part of the conversation as well, would 4%, all other things being equal. And that starts to put the UK in a pretty leading position in terms of total potential. So it gets quite exciting, and not saying that will happen overnight, but it's just useful to kind of think through the kind of extent of the levers that we have to pull here if we can get those mechanisms right. So as I said, whilst the modulation reflects how the cost is divided up, how local authority payments are calculated is assessing the size of the overall pie. And as I've mentioned, that is based on net efficient disposal and collection costs of managing household packaging waste. So we're not looking at real costs for local authorities. We are using sampled data to estimate if local authorities, and we account for cost drivers like rurality, like deprivation, so that we are enabling comparisons between local authorities or municipalities, as you might call them in Europe. And we are looking at how much we think, based on all of these different complicated factors, an efficient service should cost. That is what then is assessed for the weight of each packaging category that each authority is likely to manage. And all of that goes through a huge, big calculation. There's lots more details online. For those who want to see more details, you can scan the QR code on the bottom right-hand side. But at a high level, that's how we look to calculate the overall cost of the system. And as I said, that at the moment is about 1.5 billion on an annual basis. Just for comparison, and I perhaps should have mentioned at the beginning, prior to the introduction of this scheme, those costs would have been incurred by local authorities and collected from citizens through their council tax. So it is creating opportunity whilst those council tax bills are unlikely to go down because local authorities, as is often the case, are incredibly under-resourced, that money can be redeployed elsewhere with this new extra income stream that they are receiving from the producers via PackUK. And because we're focused on driving an efficiency and effectiveness, we're working very closely with local authorities, both to understand what efficiency and effectiveness actually means in different contexts, but also how we reduce those costs over time by improving the operational efficiency of the system. There's a number of ways in which we do that. Again, it is early days, but we are working with local authorities, and in the future, we'll introduce effectiveness assessments, and that will be our mechanism through making comparisons on performance across local authorities. But we are working through also providing sort of local authority support packages, which includes a improvement action plan, which are for those local authorities that are struggling in terms of their performance. They get additional support from a partner organisation who works with local authorities to identify actions that will help support those performance gains. We've only done a pilot for that process at the moment, so we've worked with 6 local authorities to start with, but that is something we're looking at figuring out how we scale. And there's a number of other things that we're doing from a policy perspective, including things like looking at ways we can mandate data collection to also improve our ability to model out true costs and account for all of those different variances that you would expect across a fairly diverse set of 4 nations, everything from the rural highlands of northern Scotland to some of the mountainous areas of Wales. Actually, there's quite a lot of very different setups and a number of islands across the UK that we are accounting for. And whilst it is early days, what is promising, given we've only just completed year 1 of the scheme, is that we are starting to see some real examples of those investments already happening with local authorities. So there's a few, I'll just touch on a couple of examples here. There are many others that we are also starting to see as local authorities are using their PEPR funds to invest in driving improvements in their service. Some of those are local authorities or municipalities who are sort of clubbing together to provide joint investment. So Hampshire, Portsmouth and Southampton councils in the south of England as examples who are using their funding to support a new MRF, upgrade existing MRFs and extend the network of waste transfer stations so they can handle a wider range of recyclable material. All of that is supported by communications work and education, behaviour change efforts with citizens. And other examples where councils have extended their curbside sort collection service. They've added households, they've procured new vehicles and new containers. So there's quite a lot of flexibility in how local authorities use the funding. That is intentionally the case. At the moment, PackUK has no intention to audit local authorities in terms of how that funding is used, but they are under very strict guidance as to what it can and can't be applied for. And it does need to be focused on household packaging, and over time, coupled with the effectiveness assessments, we'll get clearer data and clearer signals as to where that's driving the outcomes that we are looking for. And of course, with the producers increasingly involved through the producer responsibility organisations, we also have a number of other technical advisory committees where we bring in industry experts and support. I know this is an area that will be of close interest to a lot of our stakeholders. So something we're spending a lot of time thinking about, how do we get that balance right? And from everyone that I've spoken to on the local authority side, we all know that they're very committed to trying to use this opportunity of having additional funds to really make a difference to the UK waste and circularity system as a whole. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but that is a bit of an overview of how EPR works in the UK. I hope that was interesting and helpful. And as Anna mentioned, we're happy to take questions offline and come back to you after the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther, for very detailed presentation on the system in transition as the UK packaging EPR reform is. I like what you said about EPR in UK being a tool for implementation of circular economy. I very much like your step-by-step approach to this comprehensive topic of extended producer responsibility. And I also noticed a very important methodology, which is proceeding with the reform based on the dialogue and cooperation with the stakeholders. So I hope it will be extremely informative for all the countries and other global regions that face the necessity to implement or even reform their extended producer responsibility schemes. I would like to add additional information on behalf of Reloop platform. So I would like to invite you to have a look at Reloop's website, reloopplatform.org, and we have a dedicated section for extended producer responsibility. I would like to pay your attention to the newly elaborated policy recommendations for Circular Economy Act, including principles for efficient extended producer responsibility, namely transparent fees, monitoring and enforcement penalties, and a very important topic of harmonization across the European Union. We are also very happy to introduce you to the EPR toolbox that is available on our website. So you're welcome to have a look and utilize a lot of resources that we have on the topic of extended producer responsibility. With that, I would like to thank the whole team of PackUK very much for your participation, also for preparation to this webinar. Esther Carter, Chief Strategy Officer, as well as Rhys Jones and Jane Martin. I would like to thank my colleague, Barry Snedden, our Communication Director. We have noted the questions that you placed on chat and in Q&A section, and we will come back with the answers. Thank you very much, and you can have a look at the website for more information about upcoming webinars on EPR and not only. Thank you so much for participation today.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Anna.